Great. Well, with that, let me jump in. I'll say welcome again to everyone. My name's Alex Lamb. I'm the founder and CEO of BOLDLY. I'm Australian, but I'm based in Dubai. We've been running BOLDLY as a full end-to-end coaching and consulting services firm since 2016. So as a Singapore headquartered company, but we've been operating all across Asia Pacific as our sort of backyard, our primary markets. And more recently, we've extended into North and South America and also the Middle East, where I'm based now. So we're sort of want to be a part of the growth of the coaching profession as an industry as a whole, as we grow and professionalize and see coaching standards and coaching practices really advance all around the world. So we mostly work with small to medium-sized companies up to large organizations, so all B2B, and we have a real niche in the industrial, consumer, agribusiness and life sciences sectors predominantly. So pleased to have you all here. As I said, I know there's going to be several other people who are coming in and out. Today's session is focused on Asia, particularly. However, we do have people who are going to be joining today who are from Australia, who are from the Middle East. So I believe and I know that there's a lot of themes here that are universal, that carry across, but that we do have a lot of data and some more specific insights from the Asia region, which Chris is leading up for us. So I will hand to Chris, but I'll just say, briefly first that this is a topic that I feel we've habituated to, we've kind of gotten used to, and we all talk about COVID, being in the past, hybrid kind of was the accepted period. In different markets, we're now dealing with the different legal requirements to offer hybrid working to employees, and then different personal perspectives of CEOs and leaders across different businesses about how performance should be driven either in office or fully remote, or obviously a hybrid being that combination. So it's a topic that we feel has kind of become a little bit of we've habituated to, and it's become a little bit in the background. But actually, being that it's the new normal, we need to bring intentionality, we need to bring insights about how to make teams effective in this new reality. So hence the session today. We have run this in Australia and New Zealand and got a lot of great feedback. So we're kind of taking it on a world tour. And that's where I'll hand over to Chris, who's going to be the facilitator for today. So all yours, Chris.
Thanks, Alex. Let me just quickly introduce myself. I'm based out of Hong Kong. I arrived in Hong Kong about 16 years ago and fell in love with the place and have been here ever since. And most of my professional background has been working in professional services consulting firms focused on what we would probably all call sort of human capital services. And I'm very proud to be part of the BOLDLY leadership team, and I'm responsible for the Asia geography. And I'm glad that Alex brought this topic back up, because I think it's one that obviously garnered a lot of attention through the pandemic and in the first year or so after that. But I think it's fallen into the kind of shadows a little bit. However, contextually, we do see through the work that we do, and I operate as a coach as well, that this is something which leaders are struggling with, and particularly relevant in the Asia region, which is a complex basket of many different markets and cultures. And so this is something which there are a lot of implications to getting wrong. And I think whilst we're not here to advocate for or against the idea of remote or hybrid working, we do want to bring some attention to where some of the difficulties might be. And I was really glad, as I mentioned earlier, to see we had people joining us from lots of different countries, and I would like this to be a conversation. So we'd love to get your perspectives and your experiences shared in the group as well. Alex, do you want to? I think you've talked briefly about BOLDLY. Do you want to just pick up the first couple of slides for us and just give us a high level on a bit about BOLDLY? Although I think some people here might know us, but for those that don't, good to hear that.
Happy to, yeah. And as Chris mentioned, we love this to be conversational. So feel free to interject. I know that's a good coaching and HR skill. So don't hesitate to come off mute and voice in at any point. But I'll be watching the chat too, so you can certainly make comments there. So really briefly, I know some of you are our coaches. We've got some clients on the call and joining as well. So you know us, but we do everything, as I said, beginning to end coaching. It's a real passion of mine, and it's a deep expertise across the whole business. We, at that base layer of our model, have our coach marketplace and our engagement platform. So this is where we have all of our professional coaches who we've screened and vetted on to the marketplace, who are able to deliver one-on-one group or team coaching out to clients. You know, we've got self-serve clients there, as well as large clients coming in who work with Boldly. We then have that midsection of learning programs. So using our coach base, we facilitate unique coach-led learning, mostly around leadership, managers, high potential females, and coaching skills for supervisors as well. And then at the top of that model, we have our coaching culture advisory, where we work with larger clients who have bigger coaching operations, and they need to find efficiencies and make sure that they're smoothing how they operate those coaching pools, particularly aligned to learning and key talent pools. So that's where we bring in our coaching technology to make sure that the matching, the booking, the continuous improvement, the collection of quality is there, and that we can deliver that reporting and insights to clients. So we work with clients, as I said, our main focus is in Asia, but we work with clients globally. And here, what I'll say is, just as we start to introduce into the hybrid model. So why is this pertinent now? You know, we've been working with clients across coaching, and we keep hearing this piece around teams are suffering, communication's broken down, managers are having a hard time driving performance as they, you know, with their previous tools. So we actually found this great article, and we'll share out a pack after this session with some resources. But the quote here, nearly 75% of respondents to this large scale 2024 study, was they were really articulating that the businesses hadn't trained their managers to lead distributed teams. It just became the new normal, but we hadn't created any skills or enablement around it. So there was no new norm, new best practices to actually support how managers were managing across differences. So considering that nearly 60% of employees now have the option to work remotely across the Asia region, but speaking more broadly, and that is a combination of work from home, work from office. It is even just the traditional companies that have multiple offices where teams are having to meet, you know, via Teams or via Zoom. That this has really become a requirement, but that managers still just don't have that skill to deliver it. So we're just kind of highlighting there that it is the new normal, but we've kind of got a lag effect with how we're helping managers and really creating the capability and the toolkit to do this well. So I'll just jump onto the next one, Chris.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. So I think one of the things that became clear is there's no single blueprint or answer to the question, you know, what is hybrid? But it seems to have a number of different characteristics. And you know, we talk about flexible work arrangements, and now people have, in a lot of cases, more autonomy over the hours they want to keep and the locations they want to work from, and you know what makes sense for their roles. So there's a shift in terms of autonomy in those choices. We also can see, and we'll touch on this through some of the research that we identified, that you know it gives us potential flexibility in determining what is the right mode to deliver the work and the outcomes that we're focused on, if it's online, if it's face-to-face, or you know a blend of those at a sort of one-to-one or team level. So we can kind of see this is a really dynamic thing, and it's, you know, the context are that it is not a linear process. It is dynamic. It is not something which we can put into a box and say that everyone will operate to the same standard. And to some extent, as Alex mentioned, this has been a bit of a sleeper subject. And what it means for organizations is still emerging and becoming clear. And we have a case study from Microsoft, which I think will bring some color to that. So when we think about the configurations of hybrid, there are some characteristics that are common, but they also present certain challenges. And I think that you know, when I think about this topic, I kind of come back to a mental model of the person, the role, and the system, and each of these things you see on the screen can kind of have an influence or mean something different to one of those phases of that model. You know, where the place that we want to connect and collaborate, where we want to have more concentrated work, it could be the office. Where we want to have isolation to be able to focus, to have more mindful work, but also the flexibility to accommodate life, could be home, and so on. So we can see that there is no one size fits all, but there are a lot of things which people and managers and organizations are wrestling with to try and make sense of this new norm that we're operating in. This is an interesting quote, and Satya shared this it was around 2022 when Microsoft delved into their own organization and tried to understand how hybrid or flexible working was impacting their business. What were the symptoms, and in particular, kind of how do they need to respond to that as a business? And what they could see was, as I mentioned earlier, there is no standard way of operating in a hybrid work environment. In fact, what we can see is that it doesn't just differ organization to organization. Actually, within a company, it can differ market to market and even team to team. So whilst the paradox here is that we think about hybrid working as potentially offering us simplification, quite the opposite. And in fact, they found through the research they did, which covered tens of thousands of people, that around 2/3 of people were asking for and wanting more flexibility, but conversely, also wanting more in-person collaboration. So there's a really good example of where, on the face of it, this could be something which offers simplification of work, but actually it is making work more complex, and the roles, especially for managers and leaders, something which requires some reimagining. We wanted to talk about where we were in Asia right now with this subject, and there's been a lot of research, just from the early days of the pandemic through to now, so trying to help us understand where businesses are in terms of developing their strategies. And McKinsey last year in their Future at Work in Asia highlighted that there's a lot of adoption of hybrid models, and the strategy is really to focus on offering flexibility, giving employees a level of autonomy on how they want to engage with their lives and work and blend those things together. And they found that almost 2/3 of organizations that they spoke to had already implemented a hybrid model. And in fact, that businesses such as Tata, DBS, and we know that Singapore Airlines as well, were seen to be describing themselves as really successfully implementing the hybrid strategies. And this was also reinforced by Mercer this year, who saw that over 3/4 of businesses had implemented hybrid work. And this was something which was really crucial to them attracting talent. It gave them the flexibility to gave their clients the flexibility to go out and recruit from new pools and bring new kinds of capability and skill into the workforce that previously wasn't available to them. So there were some tangible benefits and a real commitment to making this new norm work. It doesn't come without its implications, however. So we're going to delve into that. Some positive, and some maybe are challenges which businesses really need to be reacting and responding to. The survey that Microsoft completed and the study they did internally threw up a few different things. It showed that whilst there was a more dense connection within teams, there was a symptom operating beyond that, which is that collaboration was operating in a really siloed way. It wasn't enterprise-wide. There wasn't a horizontal collaboration. It was really a vertical collaboration. And so there was a lot of white space between teams, and managers were really struggling to enable their teams to work across the business. So as a result of that, the internal networks became more static, and actually all the investments that organizations have made in deploying digital solutions to support communication became actually relatively redundant because so much of the communication and the work was happening within teams. And this does mean that results in a downgrading in terms of knowledge transfer, and it restricts the ability for broadening perspective and understanding across functions and across geographies. So we can see that had a really tangible impact on the quality of results and outcomes that they were measuring through the study. So for them, this was really profound and something that they needed to kind of react to and embrace and find ways to enable the workforce, enable the managers to overcome some of these issues. When I think about the system of a business, I have a tendency to think about it in sort of human-centric terms. And so, I think about organizational culture, and this is one of the things that's really been in the spotlight through the pandemic and beyond. I think of it as similar to the human central nervous system. In other words, the culture of a business is something that provides the tributaries and the pathways that make us connected. They connect our work, they connect us as human beings, and they also ensure that the general health and well-being of the workforce and the community that it operates in is there. However, what we saw with hybrid and remote working is that it started to stretch that fabric, and it starts to exert quite different and unique pressures. And businesses weren't really ready for this. And you can imagine, whilst in our own nervous system, we have the ability to talk to every part of our body, if we were to lose an arm, then suddenly that would be much more difficult to communicate with that part of our body. So similarly, when we start to see a disparate workforce, this is one of the challenges, and leaders were really forced to rethink how they operate, the ways of working. What we saw through a lot of the studies was that actually that a lot of leaders are recognizing they simply didn't have the core skills and the essential skills they needed to really make managing remote teams effective. It was McKinsey actually who had some quite interesting findings from their research, and they saw that one of the costs of the reduction in collaboration, which is something that Microsoft saw, was that innovation almost disappeared. It felt like overnight for a lot of businesses, and with it, performance. And it kind of stands to reason, and it's quite unsurprising, businesses that manage to foster collaboration despite operating in a hybrid environment, 5 times more likely to be high performing. So we can see that that not reacting or responding to this new norm in the right way and supporting managers is delivering quite substantial cost. And something which, and this is really anecdotal, as I mentioned earlier, I work as a coach, and I work with individuals and with teams. And one of the subjects that comes up in Asia a lot is the challenge of maintaining a healthy level of professional trust. And it reminded me of the trust equation, which is, a lot of you would have seen this, but it's, credibility plus reliability. In other words, do I have the skills, the knowledge, the mindset, plus, am I going to deliver on what I say I'm going to do, together with intimacy? And by that, we mean kind of more human-centric side of work, which is building social networks, operating empathetically and in a caring way, being considerate and compassionate. And what we zoomed in on here was that the intimacy was one of the areas which was really disappearing as a result of the hybrid working environment. And with it, that was having a profound impact on managers' ability to build and maintain trust with their teams, and likewise kind of colleague to colleague. So this is something which has been a pretty hot topic, and has showed up quite regularly when we have team coaching events, is like how do we foster or develop more trust? Because we know when trust is high, our propensity towards performance is also high. So this is one of the core challenges we're seeing in this region. Sorry, I went a bit quickly there. Alex, can I just hand over to you for a moment to zoom in on some of the signals that you're seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think everyone here, you're probably well versed in how to diagnose either what's happening with an individual coachee, what's happening with a team or a broader organization. But we wanted to call some of these elements to attention and sort of connect them back to perhaps hybrid team or the new hybrid structure being the source of some of the friction or the discomfort. So, issues with productivity, definitely the communication breakdown that we've mentioned, already so far. The feelings of isolation, if there's staff or individual coachees who are talking about their sense of being disconnected from their teams or from the broader business. Of course, we had that kind of discussion around blurred lines of work and life. Particularly for, I know when we had COVID first start, we found for a lot of our early careers professionals who might have still been living at home, or maybe even still living in sort of university-style dormitory environments, where the workplace at the desk was literally right next to where the bed was, that there's only maybe a meter's difference, and then there's no transitional zone between that work and that life scenario. So it's very hard for the mind to create the code switch between when am I at work and when am I at home. previously we might have had the commute, you know, that time sitting on the bus or the train or in the car as you make the upwards ramp into the office, and then the downwards ramp again as you exit, to metabolize what's about to happen, what has just happened that day, before you enter back into your home life. But now with hybrid and all of the different varieties that we have of hybrid, we've potentially lost some of that transitional zone. Okay, so and that, you know, as Chris said, that comes in a variety of formats for different people, but it is very important to think that blurred line is really evident. And then lack of career development opportunities. We still hear from a lot of coachees that they feel like if they're not directly visible, if they're not in front of somebody, sitting at the front of the boardroom table when there's a presentation happening, or crossing someone in the hallway and being able to say hi, that they're missing those kind of visceral opportunities to raise their profile, to be visible to potential sponsors and people who are decision makers in the business. And that the outputs, the performance on paper, which is still important, but it becomes the only way that they're able to articulate their value to the business. So you might see some of those, but also I would say, particularly if I've been coaching individuals or teams, I feel like this hybrid issue also bubbles up in anxiety from leaders, just saying, I need everybody back to the office. I don't know what they're doing if I can't see them. You might hear some of that. Or from team members, I need to be back in the office. I can't focus unless I'm there. It's this very binary thought model that creates a lot of anxiety in both managers and staff that you might just be hearing in generalized terms. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about how to potentially coach when you see some of those symptoms and that evidence coming forward. And we've got the QR code here for a more detailed diagnostic blog that Chris and I have written. If anyone on this call wants to do a diagnostic, please reach out to us. We're happy to discuss some of those symptoms that you might be seeing. So if I just click on to the next one. Did you have any comments there, Chris? Otherwise, I'll move on to the
couple of observations. Yeah, thanks, Alex. Yeah, a couple of observations actually. One is something which is, I think, what I have seen working with the clients and the coaches that I support, is that the impact of that blurred work-life boundary is really acute in this region, especially when line managers are out of region and there's a lot of demand on people's time, and there's a tendency to work a little bit round the clock, and this feeling that if I'm working remotely, then there's even more expectation there. And I think that around career development opportunities, something that I hear frequently from leaders in region is that there is an expectation for a more assertive style. And again, working with their leadership teams out of region, they're finding it increasingly difficult to show up in a way where there is a clear expectation, and similarly, how they work with their teams feels a little bit like they have one hand behind their back. So I think there is sensitivities around this which are quite acute in the region, and definitely are cropping up more frequently, I would say, in the last couple of years than I'd noticed beforehand.
Agreed. So we really see, for all of those symptoms that we've described, and you probably observed others as well, coaching is very, very uniquely positioned as an intervention by nature of the style that we can deploy it quickly, that it can be individual, it can be group, it can be team, it can be at the system level, and that it can be so tailored to, as we find, the unique challenge of that hybrid work environment. So we've worked with clients globally who are trying to make sure that they are both intervening when they see that there's a challenge, and also building the muscle, the skill and the capability for future hybrid team collaboration. So we're really talking here about, COVID's in the rear view. We're talking here about moving from surviving to thriving. How is this now that hybrid has habituated for us, but that we need to be able to define the new operating performance? What does great look like in this model? And the key that we'd say here is intentionality. We're going to talk about that term intentionality throughout the coaching and throughout all of the interventions that we have here. So just jumping on to the next slide. What this intentionality means is that we need a new type of leader, essentially, with new skills and new capability of understanding hybrid. A lot of leaders who are struggling to adapt and come into the hybrid model, it's fair, it's reasonable, because we still have this whiplash from the change that we all, didn't subscribe to but went through. But for the leaders that are really going to thrive, it will be about working out much more dynamic ways of leading in distributed and dispersed work teams. Okay, so we've looked at that, and Chris mentioned this before, that we can design interventions at that individual level. So potentially for the leader or any individual who's in the team, maybe a node who's a real influencer in the team. We can look at the manager, direct management skills within that team. We can look at how we coach the team itself on communication, relationships, their interconnectivity with other teams, making sure that they're proactive there. Then, as Chris said, the Microsoft research really found that even when you've got a great leader and a great team, we want to try to avoid that silo of vertical collaboration and make sure that it's still happening in the system, at the system level. So that's where we need to be able to bring in a lot more dynamic coaching initiatives at the culture level, the skills, the mindsets, the moments that matter in terms of communication, how we bring that communication of culture and coaching at the system level to enable the leaders, the managers, and the teams to operate within that environment. So I'll pass to Chris, because we've got now 3 different types of interventions, as we say, at the are we intervening at any of these levels, the culture, the leader, the manager, or the team, with either hybrid skills, performance-focused skills, or human-centered skills. This is the model that we use for our hybrid coaching. All yours, Chris.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. So I think when we describe, as Alex has said, when we describe kind of intentionality as a leadership style for as a terminology, it might be new for some of the businesses that we've spoken to. But what sits underneath it, I think, really is quite intuitive, no surprise. But it's broadening perspective. It's thinking about longer term impact, and also making sure there's really clear and explicit alignment with the decisions that they're making, with where the organization is going, and also thinking about the team. So it is about considering the more complex aspects of the role of leadership in the context of hybrid models. So what does good look like? And yes, it does require that broader perspective. And I think we see, if you look at the model on the right-hand side, we see kind of 3 key areas. We describe business as a human endeavor, and we would see the benefits of a more human-centered skill set. And that really is about building connection, providing the kinds of tailored support and coaching, and also showing up sort of authentically, being available to team members in a way perhaps that we haven't always seen. And I think some of those historical models were not always so effective. But I think bringing the sort of more human-centered skill set, and that is something which we saw was neglected when the hybrid and remote working was thrust upon us. And then also making sure that when we have a performance-focused skill set, we're really thinking about, from an intentionality standpoint, we're thinking about how do we make sure that goals are really clear, that we're removing ambiguity, that really we are ensuring that some of the hard skills have been modified around how we provide feedback, how we have performance conversations, how we delegate work. What are the adaptations that need to be made, and how do we support managers to embrace some of those styles, and how to bring those sort of hybrid skills together. And so we acknowledge this is a complex picture, and there are a lot of competing realities, and some of the biases that managers are carrying around, the ways of working of the past, how to help them let go of some of those things and start experimenting with these new ways. And within that, there is certainly a need to maybe see some sort of mindset shift as well, because this is something which needs to cascade down into teams, not something that is exclusively within the leadership community. So what are the drawbacks of holding on to some of those historical approaches? If we look on the left-hand side, where people might be, not exclusively, but there may be degrees of this in some of the leaders in your businesses and the people you work with, is we need to move away from things like a more directive, command-driven leadership style and move towards something which is more human-centered. And I don't think micromanagement has necessarily always been seen as a positive thing, but shifting from a sense of control to how do we empower people to and to have accountability for outcomes, focusing on building trust so that we acknowledge that people want to do the right thing, and we need to provide the guidance and the boundaries and the explicit direction on what needs to be done so they can focus on delivering. And also we see delegation, style of delegation needing to shift. So you can see where this is, coming from, but where we really want to be when we talk about the mindset shift in being a more intentional leader. And implicit to explicit is an interesting one. So, I think in the past there was a tendency to see explicit direction as being more command-led, but actually it's not about that. It's about setting clear expectations, as I mentioned earlier, removing ambiguity, ensuring that there is the right level of focus on the right priorities, so there is a better level of alignment. And I think that's really what we're talking about, from going from implicit to explicit as a style. And coming back to Microsoft, so I think that the three things that the three key findings came out was around, this productivity paranoia. If I can't see what people are doing, are they delivering? And I think where Microsoft wanted to move to was a shift towards more outcome focused work. So coming back to that piece around, we enable people, we give them a level of accountability, and we trust them to deliver outcomes, and we manage results, versus making sure that people are being in work at the right time, and that they're delivering at a micro level. Also embracing the fact that, the people want to come into the office to be social, to be connected, to work collaboratively. That is one of the key reasons to be in the office. And it's not related necessarily to the results or productivity, but it's certainly something that can enhance the results of the business. And this idea of re-recruiting employees, if I think back to back when I had an employed role years ago, when I first came to Hong Kong, my job explicitly stated that I was in the office, that this is the way that I need to work. And so if we're changing the system and we're modifying the way that the people are being asked to work, to some extent we need to rehire them to this new way of working, and within that enable them. There's some things on the right we would add to this as well. So creating an environment where it's okay to get things wrong. This is really kind of drawing down on some of our proven change management strategies, that we allow ourselves to fail because this is how we learn, and that we don't have all the answers. There isn't a blueprint that we can just follow, but we actually need to iterate and evolve this as a group and learn together. And also for leaders to take a really proactive role in increasing interaction and communication. So, how to make sure that people do still feel that level of social connection, that they do still feel enabled to go and collaborate and work with beyond the boundaries of their own team. And this is something which actually has been talked about for a long time. I remember when the corporate executive board did a piece around enterprise performance, and the highest performing leaders were those that really encouraged their team members to work horizontally across the business, and engaging their colleagues from other teams in their projects. And I think that's a really good reminder. And lastly, to make sure that we do embrace people's perspectives, that we encourage them to challenge, that we encourage them to ask questions, because coming back to our first point, this is how we're going to learn. So I think we would, pull all of this together. This is the kind of environment that would enable leaders to operate intentionally and still feel confident that they have, the system that they need to manage a hybrid team. Alex, I'm going to hand back over to you for this one, because I know that this is something that you're really passionate about, and I think it'd be great to hear you run through this one.
Yeah, thank you. So I've been coaching several executives and working with HR leaders to enable hybrid effectiveness in their businesses. And one thing that I'd say that Chris has mentioned is that all of the new insights around performance management apply. So in some ways, this is a very parallel conversation around relieving ourselves of some of the old command and control, high visibility performance insights, and coming to a much more dynamic, continuous feedback, outcomes focused. That new world of performance management is really nicely aligned to effectiveness in hybrid. And so when we're working with leaders going on that journey for hybrid and new world of performance, it is often about asking them to open up their concept of control and their concept of performance. Because those things are intertwined. You know, as Chris said, sometimes the leadership instinct is to clamp down more on control for performance to drive outcomes, as opposed to enable a system and support and coach people to get those outcomes. So if you're somebody who's going to be coaching or leading these kind of hybrid teams, it's really about enabling those leaders to understand more complexity and work in this more dynamic environment. So some of those questions that we typically talk about, speaking to a leader, what might it look like if you relinquish some control of this situation? And vice versa, what would it look like if you tighten control? Okay, we don't want to freak them out or scare them. It's about looking at it from all angles and saying, what are the actual consequences of the tightening versus loosening control here, and just exploring that concept of control with them. What strategies are you using to respond to the messiness you're perceiving in the hybrid world? So specifically by talking to them about strategy, you're making it intentional. You're making it as though they've thought about it and that they're going at it, you know, with this intentionality that we've said is so important. So you're bringing awareness. It kind of might sound a bit passive aggressive, but you are putting them in the driver's seat of the hybrid scenario. What signals do you expect to see? What other strategies might you use? So you're asking them to look at it through the lens of a business problem. It's not just an emotive issue that I need to clamp down on. Hey, this is a legit new business theme. How would I tackle it? So how do you anticipate the workplace will evolve over time? Thinking about it into the future. Because a lot of the time, leaders in this scenario are experiencing anxiety because of the change from having moved from what they knew. Okay, if we're talking about leaders who are in their 40s, 50s, 60s, who environment of you're in at 8, you leave by 6, you know, you eat your lunch at your desk and, you know, you wear a black suit and a white shirt and a tie. We all came from much more conservative business environments, and that was what we were socialized into. It's what we grew up to know. So it's no wonder that people are finding, hey, where this shift has happened all of a sudden is quite anxiety inducing. So asking them to think about it into the future, it is going to keep changing, and what role do they want to play so they can feel like they're ahead of it. And then how does your personal history impact? You know, do those models still serve you now? So I find that last one is a really, really important question. We're not asking them to change everything about themselves or about their working, you know, world, but the world has changed. COVID's happened. Technology is better. All of these things have combined to create hybrid as a reality. So does your old model actually serve you, and letting them create the self-awareness to come from, you know, to come from that. So hopefully those are some practical ones, questions that you
I really like that last one.
Yeah. Feel free to steal it.
I just think it helps a leader think about a multi-generational working environment where another person may have had a different experience.
Yeah.
Totally.
Spot on. Yeah, spot on.
And what works then might not work now. It's the perennial. Sorry, Christian.
No, it's okay. I was going to iterate the same point. Actually, I think when I saw this for the first time, because Alex pulled this slide together for us, and I think that the you know, thinking about it from a multi-generational standpoint, you know, and you mentioned earlier about the anxiety that people are carrying around. There's a tendency that leaders are anxious about even asking questions related to this, that they're expected by now to just know how this works, and that, you know, that they should have this covered. And yet I think in reality, exploring, you know, hey, the way I used to work, the way I've always operated historically, you know, isn't serving me, and I really need to start examining this and start doing some reflection around this, because, you know, I don't have the answers. And I think there's a lot of leadership anxiety around that point.
Completely
Alex,
agree.
Yeah. Let me pick up. Let me pick up on this. So just delving a bit deeper, we've looked at the whole model, and I think this is a chance for us to dive down a little bit further into this. So I think that you know, when we think about human-centric side, you know, we've covered sort of what that really means, and it is engaging in upskilling managers to focus on activities such as coaching, to operate with a greater degree of empathy, and to focus on enabling communication and amplifying communication, finding ways to connect their teams and internally and with other teams as well. So when we see that in action, we do also recognize that's where the most successful managers are operating at the moment. And coming back to the piece around trust, using transparency, openness, and kind of explicit direction to ensure that people are on the same page, that they can make mistakes, that this is safe. These are all things which are crucial to create the right environment and give people a sense that the leader is working with them, that they're kind of in step and they're clear about how things need to be done. And so these are often coming up in the coaching work that we do, because there is a tendency towards hard skills, especially when leaders have been they're domain experts that have been hired into leadership roles, and now they may not have been ready for this, and this is quite a big shift for them. So that's one of the conditions for success. When we think about performance-focused leadership, I mean, this really is a big part of the major evolution of hybrid working, and it's making sure that they have the core skills in place. And this is something that we noticed was neglected coming out of the pandemic, and getting managers and leaders equipped to be able to understand the situation and to be a situational leader. Managing is a more complex, I would say, perhaps harder, but certainly more complex activity. And there are things that they really, would need to develop their own skills and take accountability for their own skills to operate as an effective manager. So, that is something which, from a development and learning perspective, should be a real focus area. And we have some questions here at the bottom, which is, good questions to ask is, for example, are our leaders engaging in these kind of spontaneous skip level communications? Are they ensuring that the relationships they have across the organization remain dynamic, that they're constantly looking for insights and constantly looking for information that's going to help them to see the bigger picture and to understand what the workforce is really needing and what they're looking for? And are they also calling awareness to the interdependence of colleagues? Are they bringing people together and understanding that how work gets done requires a level of collaboration, communication, and teaming in order to deliver? And that also we're not fixed on set a goal and go. This is something which is a continuously changing, evolving, and therefore something that needs to be recalibrated on a fairly regular basis. I think that the subject of performance review is pretty hot right now because we're mid-year, but there's often the times that OKRs or KPIs, depending on what you use, are being examined is perhaps twice a year. And actually, we can see already that that's just not frequently enough. It's a more dynamic picture than that because things are moving so quickly. And then in terms of enabling kind of positive experience for people that are working in remote environments, we come back to that piece around intentionality and really being present and showing up at the moments that really make the biggest difference, and also ensuring that we've got a combination of kind of having the right boundaries and expectations in place, but also keeping a focus on what does really good performance look like? How do we sustain the results, even though we're operating in this more uncertain or ambiguous environment? And I think recontracting is a really good way of thinking about this, making new team agreements where we state the way of working, where we make it really clear in terms of how we do things together, the right behaviors, and what the flow of work needs to look like. And when we hit against stops, when things get hard, how do we react and respond to that? So getting that level of clarity in place is crucial. So what are the implications for HR practitioners? And I think these are really good questions. I mean, these hopefully will resonate, but these are really good questions for advisors and HR to consider about where they are right now, and a bit of a status quo check. So how can HR ensure that leaders have got the right skills, that they have the ability to review work and the design of work and the systems and the flows of work, that they understand, do they have the right have a culture of being able to constantly evaluate and look at the priorities, look at the goals, and understand that they actually have the autonomy to put a pause on something if it's not really focused on the right outcomes, and equally that feedback can come from the team, not just from them. So kind of again creating that ecosystem of feedback, and constantly looking at, are we focused on the right things, and are we moving them at the right pace, and are the right people involved in them? And also, have we built networks as a feature of onboarding? So I think as we bring in new people into the business, I remember when there was a reasonable amount of hiring going on, sort of not too long after the pandemic kind of calmed down, and a lot of people were being hired into exclusively remote roles. And so how you bring people into the business, how you enable them and integrate them into your team and into the organization is crucial. And so networks play such a vital part of that, and leaders need to be ready to enable those activities. So it's a good question to ask. Have the systems and the networks been built, and do leaders and managers know how to activate those so that people come in feeling part of the culture and part of the business? Alex, do you mind if I pass back over to you for this one?
Yeah, sure. So we're just wrapping up. This is our last slide, and we'll come out for some Q&A, but just finishing off with these additional recommendations for HR and how we work with our clients. You know, it goes beyond coaching, and coaching almost becomes like the vehicle through which you channel some of these initiatives. So really, you know, one area is to redefine the value proposition. There's a lot of companies that have not just reactively fallen into hybrid, but who've created this as a part of their value proposition, showing that they're modern, showing that they're flexible, showing that they accommodate families, working parents, people who have different abilities, etc. That actually this is part of our inclusion strategy, not just, oops, we now have to have, you know, both work from home and work from office. So really being able to embrace it as a strength, and that again, that becomes a message through both attraction and development, but definitely through coaching and through the leadership of making sure that leaders understand and are on board with that message. Again, making sure that they have the skills to actually then manage a team that way. Shifting the thinking from where to how. Again, it can be just a very management mental model of my team working as a team, and I can see them all sitting around their pod or around this boardroom table, and there's a physicality to it, as opposed to how are they actually working? Can I see the outputs? Can I see the channels of communication? Can I see the knowledge that they have? Can I see the reputation that they're getting across the team? It should be shifting to that modes of communication and outcomes. Intentionality, we've talked about quite a bit as our key theme, bringing awareness to leaders and managers and HR that this is not just a reactionary piece, it's something that we need to have a strategy around and have clear goals around being effective for hybrid. The whole productivity and wellbeing piece, so making sure that we're not just, you know, people were burnt out during 100% work from home because all we did was work. So making sure that there's that balance when you're in hybrid, that there is still this element of drive for outcomes, but that we are thinking about the well-being of those people as well. Are they creating that work-life, sectionality? Identifying the right technologies, and I'll share out a podcast after this in the pack. But you know, there was obviously a surge of Slack channels and MS Teams. You know, everybody was zoomed out, etc. Making sure that the technologies are being used effectively and thoughtfully, not just, you know, in a messy reactionary way, but have brought some discipline to the practices that we need that are actually high value collaboration rather than just volume. Building leadership and teaming skills. So this can come down to workshops, it can come down to coaching, but making sure that we've got, relationship skills, breaking down bias skills, effective communication skills happening, you know, from a workshop and a training perspective. And then making sure that you've got rituals that come back in, that this culture is embracing. You know, often our rituals in the office were the kind of tangible things that we could talk about are feeling associated with the business. But if you're not there and you can't see the poster or get involved in the lunch or, you know, I don't know, ring the gong bell or whatever it happens to be, the ritual physically there, how do we bring that intentionality to the new rituals that are going to be online so that we're creating that inclusion and that performance, you know, support. So I'll pause there. These are a few of our kind of big level strategies for HR, in addition to driving coaching through it. Hopefully we've shared some food for thought, and we'd love to see, do you have questions? Do you have comments? What else can we share with you if we just throw this out? Any comments?
Hi, Alex and Chris. I do have one question. Yeah, can you share more about how you coach the system for hybrid?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. I can comment, and then maybe Chris, if you want to jump in. When we're talking about coaching the system, it is much more from a using multiple initiatives to make sure that we are identifying where are the nodes of influence across this system, what are the ways of working, what are the ways of communicating, and looking at it from at least a 6-point strategy of coaching. So that might include leadership coaching, manager and team coaching, but then it would also include skill-based programs and a communications channel. So it would really be a much more of an intensive, potentially 1 to 3 year program of work with a HR team, much like a change management program, to really see, here's our current state of hybrid effectiveness. If we bring in at least this 6-point strategy, where would we see ourselves land in terms of, those initial markers that we wanted to see for communication, performance and collaboration. So yeah, there's a few thoughts. I don't know, what do you want to add, Chris?
Yeah, no. I mean, absolutely. I think that when I think about it on a practical level, it's, a good starting point is generally to go through some form of diagnostic where you can ask some questions on what's the state of the nation, and see where there might be some breakdown, because that, when designing it more programmatically, there will be some clear priorities and areas to focus on. So I think, that is understanding kind of how the system is operating, where some of the breakdowns might be, what leaders and their teams are finding particularly difficult is a really good starting point.
Yeah, thanks, Maggie. That was great. Did you have any questions, Yvonne?
I don't really have any questions. I think there's like lots of topics in there you could probably talk for hours on. And when you raised some really great points about not onboarding and cross-team collaboration and that ability to have that kind of level of communication that is consistent across the organization. And just the new I guess focal point about focusing on outcomes and how people get to those outcomes is not the part to be focusing on anymore. When I first saw the title of the session, it just reminded me of facilitating a team meeting, which was in a hybrid model, meaning that half the team were online in a virtual environment and the other half of the team are actually in the room, and that's also extremely challenging. I personally prefer, if you're going to do it, it's better to have everyone online or everyone in the room. It doesn't always work like that. But yeah, I appreciate you breaking it down into the hybrid skills, the performance leadership skills, and the human-centered skills. I think it makes a lot of sense. So thank you.
Yeah. I think your instinct of like preferring everybody online or everybody face-to-face is what a lot of leaders would prefer as well. It's definitely the simpler way, because you can take one mode, whichever the mode of communication is, you can apply it. And I think that's a really perfect vignette about this point around intentionality. When you've got a split room, how much more effortful it is for that.
Yeah, so I've been a leader in facilitating a team meeting with 40 people online, and there's 40 people in the meeting, and there might be 16 people in the room, and I'm facilitating the meeting, so I'm running the Zoom meeting and doing like the technology as well. I think a better way of doing it is to actually have someone else who can help facilitate the online components. But then who do you delegate that to? Do you round robin it, and how does that work? But even talking to the people who are in the room, you get distracted with forgetting about the people who are online. So it is good to also recognize that they're there as well.
Yeah,
definitely. It's almost like
we
right?
yeah.
Sorry, Chris. Yeah.
No, I was going to say we feel it with some of the, you mentioned at the start, we run coach-led programs, and quite often they do involve people especially in this region, attending from different locations, and some will be in the room and some will be online. And we do a lot of practical real play type stuff, and it's hard. It's hard for the people that are trying to team together remotely, and using technology helps, but it's as you say, it requires another level of preparation and thought as well. So yeah, I totally get it.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you. I would always say if you can have somebody else manage the technology, because mentally it's two different modes, you know, your analytical brain versus your empathy brain. Your empathy there as the facilitator is thinking, how do the people online feel? How do the people in the room feel? And that's a very different mental, like cognitive load to how do these buttons work? Do I have this thing, you know, displaying correctly, etc. So having somebody take the technical part so that you can do the empathy part, I think is a really important strategy for a lot of leaders and facilitators. But then even within that, it does become about the rituals as well. Okay, everybody, we know we're hybrid. We all know the challenges of this. People in the room, I need you to talk up. People online, I'm going to call you out by name, because I want to make sure that we're all actively participating, not because I'm being a meanie, but just because we know this is going to take a lot more intentionality from us to be effective. So I think that's it's a really perfect example, because it helps us display that's what we mean by rituals. Everybody, cameras on, one question each, or whatever the ritual is, to make sure that it's not just on you, it's on all of us together collectively to make it be effective. Yeah, it's a really good, I think we've all been there. It's a good example. Cool. All right. Well, I know we've come to time.
Yeah, we're just coming up on time, aren't we? Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry, Alex, please go on.
So yeah, if I just big thanks for dialing in. It is a topic we care about. We're definitely delivering and facilitating this work in-house with clients who want to build this muscle. So, you know, if you hear these questions or thoughts come up, please think of us. We're happy to connect with you, link in, and just generally be part of each other's professional network. So thanks again for joining, and thanks, Chris, for facilitating it. Much appreciated in an online world.
Yeah, pleasure. Really, really glad to be part of it, and lovely to meet everybody.
Great. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks.